Hi, Andrea Morisette Grazzini, founder and CEO of WetheP. Happy to be here today with Eric Gieseke, the Chief of Police in Burnsville, Minnesota. Want to hear about his story. He's got an interesting story about how he came into the police work and how he's evolved all the way up to the position of chief. As young as he looks, he's the boss here. So great to have you here. Thank you for coming, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
We'd love to start a little bit with kind of where you do come from. As I shared with you, WetheP is about real people. And I know beyond your uniform, you're a real person. I've seen it, and would love to hear more about kind of, tell us a little bit about what in your childhood or what in your history brought you into this kind of work.
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. So really, I have a sort of a unique background in how I was drawn to the profession, and probably similar to a lot of officers who were drawn to the position that when they're serving the community. As a young kid, I was always fascinated with cops. There's a mystique about them, if you will. And I've heard it said before, and I believe it's absolutely true, that cops are just little kids who grew up to be what they said they were going to be. So for whatever reason, whether it was playing with the Matchbox cars as a little kid that were squad cars pretending I was that, or in my big wheel pretending I was the cop, I was always fascinated by it. And partly because when I saw police officers, I admired the uniform, and I had a great deal of respect for what they did. So I knew they were always there to take care of us when we couldn't take care of ourselves. So it was just kind of a natural a thing inside of me to want to do it. Some other examples growing up, one of my best friends growing up, we were neighbors, we did everything together. She had some challenges in her household, and growing up, I had the opportunity, unfortunately, on more than one occasion to see several squad cars parked outside her house at different times of the day or in the middle of the night. And that was because her father at the time would come home and beat her mother. So one of my first images of the police in action was really at my neighbor's house. Middle of the night, young kid, I'm probably 8 or 9 years old, and I remember hearing commotion and looking out the window, and there's a line, a parade of squad cars, and they're literally carrying her dad out of the house. And she's at the time in our house with her brother. They ran over and asked my mom and dad to help them out. And back then there wasn't 911. So you actually had to dial up that old phone that was like this, and really there was a time delay before the police officers could get there.
So they came across the street to get help.
And so we were always there to help them. My mother, father was always available to help them out. But I just remember having my friend going through that traumatic experience and just really appreciating the police officers when I saw them, that they were the ones there to help and stop the violence. I also had a mentor, and I believe being a mentor to people is incredibly important.
I've heard this story, it's great.
Be
I
a
wanted to
mentor,
ask
not
if you were a naughty teenager, and I know this is a teenage story, so you have to tell us something. You did, maybe you weren't, but try.
Well, I was a normal teenager.
Which means, Eric?
I did get in some mischief. I was never arrested.
Fair enough.
I did have some contacts with the police.
Good.
There was on occasion I was out late, past curfew and things like that, or maybe I was hanging out with kids who decided to push the envelope more than I did. I was a normal teenage kid, but I understood boundaries. And I was hanging around a group of kids at the time that were really pushing up against those boundaries and heading down a wrong road. And fortunately for me, Officer Craig Anderson of the Champlin Police Department recognized that. I was starting to, you really are who you hang out with. I think that's something we need to remind teenagers. You're the average of the 5 kids you spend the most time with.
Right.
And I was hanging around with those 5 kids, and their average was low.
Yeah.
And so they were doing some things that weren't necessarily legal or right, but there was a police officer, Andy Anderson, Champlin police officer, recognized that. Well, I was walking through the halls of the school one day. He looked at me and he kind of pointed over, and that's intimidating when you're a 12-year-old kid, and I wasn't real big, not real big now, and so this cop wants to talk to me. I'm like, looked over my shoulder hoping it was somebody else, and it wasn't. And he just said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "I'm fine." He goes, "You're kind of hanging around some people that are probably going to take you the wrong direction." And he was really decent, really professional, and I remember he grabbed my arm, and he squeezed my arm, and he goes, "Wow, you got some big biceps. You're a strong kid." I think I was 80 pounds. I was not a big, strong kid. But what he did, he said, we've got a gymnastics
But he
program.
wanted you to
He wanted me to believe
aspire.
in myself.
Right,
And
right.
so there was a feeling from this officer, made me like, wow, maybe I got something special. He said, I have a gymnastics program. It's called Andy's Tigers. And if you can get there, it's Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you can get to the gym, I'll make sure you get home, and maybe you should start gymnastics or try something other than what you're doing. And I was walking on cloud 9. I really thought, wow, this
So
is
that
neat.
quickly, so you're the guy with the 5 friends that are,
Yes.
and then this cop, it gives you just this glimmer that there's something beyond about you,
Yes.
there's some potential, and that quickly you're going, I feel cool.
Yeah,
This
it
is,
was that.
was it a
as
sense of
simple
hope
as
kind of even?
Yeah, it was
like,
it was
this is
like
good.
somebody believes in me.
Right, right.
Wow, they see some potential. It was as basic and as simple as that sounds. That really made a difference. That's why I support our police officers being out there. As a result of that, you bet, I went to his gymnastics program, and luckily I was successful in it and spent my time in the gym and not on the streets.
Yeah, yeah.
And was fortunate enough to land a scholarship at University of Wisconsin-Madison, competed there for 4 years. So it became my life. And it was really based on a simple contact. One cop
Just
saying, hey,
that.
why
But it
don't
was
you try it?
also, this was, so this cop, Andy Anderson, was what we in our work call a citizen professional. And a citizen professional is a person that takes their profession and takes it a step further into their community beyond their workday. So Andy Anderson, beyond his workday, was teaching gymnastics to youth, all boys or mix?
It was
or?
it was an all boys program.
Okay. And this was a volunteer program, or was it?
He charged us, I think, $5. It was minimal. If you couldn't
Okay.
afford to go,
Wow.
he wouldn't charge you.
Well, why did
But
he do that?
I like the way you described that, because he went above and beyond. Didn't need to do that. It wasn't
Right.
part of his job description.
Right, right.
But he did it anyways.
So why?
Cares about kids. I think he recognized making connections with people in school at an early age in a positive way can really steer people in a different direction. And I didn't realize this until years later, because I always thought he was the school cop. When in
Yeah,
reality,
when you said that, that's what you think.
he wasn't. He was just a cop who worked the beat.
So not only was he worked the beat in that area.
Yes.
Okay.
And he also knew when the classes changed, when he'd have the highest visibility. So we always just assumed he was there all the time.
So beyond that, he's a good guy that cares about kids, which I'm sure a lot of cops do, or certainly start that way. They might have their moments where they, kids are really driving them crazy in their work, if not their own kids. We've talked about teenagers and raising children, but my guess is not that was a big part of it, and yet there was also this pragmatism about it. So he comes into the school during breaks, knowing that these are the students that are going to filter out of the school at 3 o'clock and potentially cause trouble. So there's some wisdom in his, just even though that's not his beat, showing up and being present there.
Yep, and he always scheduled practices right after school.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wish. So he was a great role model. I mean, those. So I have that foundation that I've carried with me since I've, been a part of this profession.
So you went to school in Madison, and your degree was in
Psychology.
Okay, and why psychology?
Interested in people. Yeah, I'm curious about people, why people behave the way they do and do certain things. And I wasn't smart enough to do anything else. Not a doctor material. I was the reason there was a top half in school.
I have psychologist friends.
Yeah,
They're pretty smart people.
Oh, they're smart, but I was entry level. I was entry level. I thought, no, this is fascinating, and I never went out to the PhD level or anything like that. But just fascinated to understand why we do what we do, and I don't think we still understand that completely.
Isn't that amazing?
But it is fascinating.
So what? So of course this was in college, and although you're not terribly old because you're about my age, we're not old, and yet that was a few years ago. What did you learn about the psychology of people in college that you see played out in your work?
It's a good question. I think every day you see it in a different way. It's hard to summarize it in a very short, brief discussion here, but it's amazing the wonderful things people can do. We see some people do just amazing, wonderful things. They stop to help citizens, they stop to help police officers. We had a gentleman last week who I would consider a hero. One of our officers was struggling with an individual, and he stopped with no regard to his own safety and helped the officer secure the situation. So you see the good things in people, and you like to focus on that, but you also see the dark side. And the training in psychology helps you understand a little bit better, if that's possible, why people do terrible things. And sometimes you really don't quite understand it, but there's underlying factors, maybe mental health, maybe some other things. So it gives you a perspective to think beyond just what you would normally think about one individual or one circumstances.
Has that changed over the years? Has what you've seen in terms of sort of common behaviors, and in this case, I mean, you hate to focus on the negative. I'm totally with you. Every day we see as much positive as negative, and yet to try to understand at a level of empathy that our neighbors or neighbors' children or our children or family or whomever is struggling, to understand that at a level that goes beyond they're a bad guy. Has that evolved over the years? And if it has, do you see any connections to society or policy or?
If I understand your question, have I seen it change over the years? That's a very good question. I think one of the challenges being in the law enforcement profession is you see bad things every day. So it's hard over a 25-year career to say, well, it's worse today than it was, because you see it so consistently over time.
Yeah, it's your job.
Yeah, so I think there's always that element. There's consistent, that's why they need law enforcement and they need public safety, because you're always going to have those things. So to say it's more or less, I'm not sure that I can really quantify it, but I can say it's consistent.
What about cops? What about the psychology of a cop? What is the psychology? And isn't that horrible? There is no such thing as a perfect stereotype, and I just reject that. And yet, is there a psychology that sort of you see, and has there been changes in the way cops approach their work over the years? And again, I know that can be
That's a
tricky.
great question. I think so. I think well, I'll say this. I learn every day I come to work. One of my chiefs, Dave Farrington, awesome chief, a good role model for me, once told me when I was a young officer and he was a captain and then eventually a chief, he said, I come to work every day and I learn something new. And I thought, for somebody who'd been there 25 years to say that,
How could that be?
How could that be? Now, 20, 25 years later, I
I get it.
understand what he's talking about. There have been a lot of changes in law enforcement. I think we understand better now than we have ever before that what we do does impact us at our home, our own psyche. I think we're better trained to recognize some of those. We have better systems in place for officers to reach out for assistance when they're hurting or they're confused, or the job doesn't, you don't leave the job in the office, unfortunately. So we're not perfect, but we're starting to recognize our humanity, if you will. And so things that we may be willing or able to talk about now, we may not have talked about 20 years ago. So we've evolved to recognize that we're not bulletproof, and so we need to take care of one another.
Is that liberating in a way for officers to, I mean, the idea of being the perfect professional, we all sometimes struggle with that. You want to be perfect. And when you're wearing a uniform, there is also this external expectation that you're perfect, or that you are, you know, above the law, and hopefully all are, and yet maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but more so that you're so more contained or controlled in your own personal. Is it helpful for cops to be able to say, yeah, I'm a human?
I think so. Again, I can't speak for all police officers, but I can speak for myself and a majority of the officers that I know. I think there is some sense of liberation to say, hey, you're normal, and the things that are bugging you, that's okay. And you have to remember, in the law enforcement business, you change throughout your life. How you view your life at 22 or 23 as a cop, it's much different than you do at 40, and you have much more
And
experience.
we were talking about this before you and I talked, so tell me about that. So, you know, I have this vision that an officer comes in very idealistic with some of the stories perhaps that you had in your childhood, or very different ones maybe, and yet comes in with this ideal of really obviously wanting to help and wanting to be in a position of authority where they can help. But
that's a good question. I think most cops will tell you, why do you want to get in the profession? You want to help people. And
so it's not that they want to play with guns.
No.
Right,
a lot of cops, some do probably.
Okay, fair enough.
A lot of them are fascinated by that, and the gear, the stuff, and everything, the toys you get to have, and the costume you get to wear. It's great stuff. But yeah, majority of them get into it because they care about people. They do want to make a difference. And some realize quickly that you need to have realistic expectations of what you can change or what you can't change. And I know there's ideas that cops get into. They think they're going to change the world. I don't know if that's necessarily true for the vast majority of them. I think most of them realize they want to change what they can each day during their shift. So they're out there at small portions of the day doing the best job they can. Again, it's hard to measure that change and that positive difference. But if you get into it thinking you're going to change the world, you will end up extremely frustrated and probably not the ideal profession for you.
Right.
Because a lot of people don't want our help. And you
Right,
quickly
right.
learn
So
that
how
as
do you
well.
do that? I want to get more. I want to also get back to your thought that you evolve, you grow as a human and as an officer. From, like you said, at 22 to
Sure.
to a chief or a captain or something. So I want to do that, but I also then want to understand a little bit about how that management of emotions goes. But let's go back rather. How do you evolve through your? How did you maybe or how have you seen others?
I think one of the ways you naturally evolve, but I think you also have to put yourself in a position that you accept the fact you have to constantly challenge yourself. You can't stagnate. And one of the examples I heard, and it's not my idea, but it makes sense to me, if you want to be a leader in an organization or you want to be a leader, whether it's formal or informal, if it's a scale of 1 to 10 and say you're a 5, if you just stay at a 5, people below you will eventually get to a 5, and they're not going to follow you. So you need to constantly challenge yourself and
Sure.
get one level above the next person. How do you do that? Through reading, through education, through contexts like this. You look at different perspectives. But training and education are huge. And there's so many great opportunities out there for law enforcement that weren't available years ago. Speakers that talk about the emotional survival of law enforcement. There's people out there that make a living talking about cops getting real about their job and getting real and understanding that what you do is very difficult, but you can't become a victim. You can't become a victim.
Right. And so still have work to do.
Yeah, so really I think you seek out those training opportunities. There's courses, there's phenomenal amount of options available to people to make sure you have to grow. And if you don't, people will grow and you get frustrated.
Right,
And then you
right,
stay
right.
in one spot and
Right.
it's the book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
Who
exactly.
moved it? Well, you got to move.
Who
You got to
took my
move
cheese?
yourself.
Yeah.
You
Or
have to.
who moved my cheese?
Yeah.
So, you a couple times you mentioned learning, and this is something I love about my work, and the colleagues that I work with at WetheP love that every person that we interface with in every activity and every day, we're learning something new. It's sometimes overwhelming, but it's very exciting and interesting, and it feels empowering personally. What do you learn in a day? Give us some examples about that light bulb moment. You're like, wow, okay, I didn't know that before. And give me more recent ones, maybe.
How much time do we have?
Well, give me some highlights,
I
as much as
think-
you want.
I think through your careers, as a police officer, you learn that people are capable of doing things you really didn't imagine. And you hear about those things, but then when you actually see it, it's kind of
For
stunning
example?
at first. A suicide or a murder or violent crime against somebody. When you actually see that for the first time, it is a little bit shocking. I think most cops will tell you. So what you read about in school and what you actually see, it has a different impact. You learn throughout your career by experiencing. Some of the aha moments for me at each level as a patrol officer would be those shocking, wow, I can't believe this person actually did that, or I can't believe this person actually spit on me or kicked me or hit me. And then you evolve, as I was able to do through the profession, become a sergeant or a supervisor. Then you have a different light bulb moment going, wow, I'm responsible for the whole shift, not just my part of town. So you're forced to look at a bigger picture. You have to put yourself in a position the landscape is constantly changing. And so you evolve through your career that way. And so the aha moments get bigger and different. And probably the aha moment for me as a chief, and there's many of them, is just the demands on the organization every day. And I have to be sensitive to the fact that I have a pretty high tolerance for pain and I have a lot of endurance.
Yeah, you're patient as well.
But I can't expect all the officers to always have my same thought process. So I want to be sensitive to where they're at.
I would like
Yeah,
that
wouldn't
too.
that be nice?
Yeah, it would.
So really the aha moment is understanding that there's a lot of moving parts and you have to be sensitive to them all, but at the end of the day, there's certain ways certain things
And
have
every
to get done.
day, an officer, as hard as they're working, might be coming in with their own stressors, or they might encounter things that they just weren't ready for that day, or
Yep.
whatever, as professional as they want to be. It's interesting because I think, and I don't think you were involved in this, but you're the officer, or you're the chief in my community, and some years ago there was a house next door to me, and a cop came to our neighborhood block party, our national night out, and made the mistake, or you would not say it was a mistake, but said, if you even have an inkling, call us. And I didn't realize that was what we were supposed to do. I thought you only call the police if you know if there's like blood spurting or if there's an accident or something. So a couple weeks later, I noticed some weird activities at a neighbor's house, and so I called the Burnsville Police, and the police at first were really having a hard time, as I was, squaring what might be going on. And what I learned through that process, it ended up being call after call, as they just said, keep calling when you see things, and sooner or later it'll make some sense. But what I learned was how it's not quite as easy either as it looks. And I went with this idea. It turns out it was a very large drug ring in the home next door to me, a nice, well-kept neighborhood. And the cops had their own personal disbelief, including the beat cop was saying, nah, it couldn't be. Not that I'm distrusting you, and yet. So a couple things happened were lessons for me. First of all, that the police do trust your instinct at some level. Second of all, that they're strapped. So there was some moments in time where I was like, who do I talk to? Do I talk to drug task force? Do I talk to my beat cop? Do I, and there was even confusion at that particular time some years ago in the force. So it's a normal human organization that has its normal human issues. And then layered on top of that, there were other drug cases that were more immediate and more obvious. So just the layers of really what you're talking about is all these moving parts constantly. And then the last lesson, and this was a hard one for me, was that there was some value of me. There was, if I had not called, nobody would have called, because I did talk to my neighbors. Most of my neighbors either were somewhat unaware of it. They kind of said, yeah, maybe, but I don't know, you know, kind of that disbelief or some denial. And also some real fear. Numerous of them said, I wouldn't make a call like that because I'm afraid of. And it's unclear if they were afraid of the police, you know, being angry, or I don't know, or if they were afraid of the criminals. And apparently they were a pretty aggressive group. So how complex that all was really struck me.
And I'm glad you brought that up, and that's a great example because you experienced it. And that's something our organization has talked about. All the PDs would have the same message: when in doubt, call us. And we've talked before, when your head and your gut aren't shaking hands on something, reach out to us. But I also know it can be a little intimidating because the vast majority of people live in Burnsville are awesome, law-abiding citizens. So their brain doesn't always work like a cop, which is probably a good thing. And they don't want to believe people are capable of doing bad things, especially their neighbors who seem normal. But follow those instincts. We obviously only have so many officers available to work the street, and this is old message, but it's worth saying. You know your neighborhood better than we do.
Now, this is not an old message, and it's a frustrating one for me as a citizen. And you know, obviously this is my work. So, and the reason this is my work isn't for the money. We were talking about, are you a cop for the money? And you said, not really. I do this work because it's my way of being engaged in my community as well, and the communities around the world. But what's frustrating, what was really frustrating in that situation, somewhat different than when, you know, going back to your childhood and your friend, you know, where these friends came across the street, is now there seems to be a lot of reluctance around doing that, around, you know, communicating with neighbors and being really alert to what's going on. I know you've shared that your mom was very concerned about what was going on across the street. Now there's this sense that that's impolite. I wouldn't want to get anyone in trouble, or it's none of my business, or there's a real individualism sometimes, and that's very frustrating. So I think it's not an old saw. In fact, I think it needs to be renewed, and maybe I'm seeing it from my own frustrated view.
Well, that's why I appreciate what you do, because I do think you recognize things in a different way. You're in the community, you see there's a need for improvement in how neighbors communicate, and it is a community. It's about people working together to make a difference. That's our mission statement, people working together to make a difference through excellence in policing, and people includes the citizens. And so really, for us to engage the citizens, that's one thing, but it's a two-way street.
Right.
And for people to call us when they're not sure about something, that's huge, and I can give examples, and I won't name specific people because I don't want to embarrass them, but I've had relationships with people in the community for 25 years. People, when I worked the street, will still call me now as a chief, and I remember, we talked about this issue. They'll see new issues. And one of them was concerned they were bugging us. I said, you're never bugging us. But they've been calling me long enough in the police department to realize sometimes these things take time. Then we'll take care of one issue, and then another one will pop up. And what I appreciate about this individual is she consistently calls and she's patient and she understands our limitations, and sometimes the resolution isn't overnight. It may take months, or in some cases years, or some cases it's years and years of frustration. So, but having that relationship in place through those phone calls, those face-to-face contacts, they understand our heart. They understand our motivation, that we're human beings out there just like they're trying to do the best we can within the rules that we have, and the policies and the laws that we have to follow. So it can be frustrating for people because our society, as you well know, we like instant gratification.
I did not want drug dealers next to me at all.
And sometimes those issues are a deeper dive. And so if the community can understand that, yeah, we don't ignore things, we work with them as well as we can. And if it was that easy just to take care of it overnight, we'd do it. But the longer, more complex issues.
The other thing I appreciated, about that, it gets to what you're talking about, and I became frustrated in this in this piece to the point where I was grumping at whomever, some department head. I think I grumped at the mayor. I said, "You've got a problem."
She's a good sport about those things.
You've got a problem, and it's next door to me. But what I appreciated was the tolerance for me as a grumpy citizen, not a rolling.
We call it concerned citizen, not a grumpy citizen.
Thank you. Well, I was grumpy.
An engaged citizen.
That's right. That's right.
An engaged citizen with passion and intensity.
There you go. That might be accurate. But I think the learning for me there, and it did take time. It took at least 6 months, at least, if not longer, before everything was said and done. And it was, as you said, it was stages. You couldn't go into the house, so apparently you did some stakeouts, and then you couldn't. You could only arrest when you saw behaviors. So then, one of our neighbors would see you guys pull over somebody every couple days. So it took time, but the other neat thing is after I'd been grumpy, and even the beat cop, a good guy, would get grumpy with me. He'd say, there was a sustained relationship. There was never a stop calling us ever. I was repeatedly told, just keep calling, keep trying. Apologies sometimes not needed. But also this willingness calling, keep trying. Apologies sometimes not needed. But also this willingness to share with me. A couple of the cops said, "What do you want to know? We'll tell you anything you want to know. And do you know we can use robots and go into?" And I was like, "No, I don't want to know that." But that was the piece that really made me feel that they saw me as, I don't want to say an equal, but certainly an equal to solving this problem.
Yep, that's a great example. And we try to share as much information as we legally can, and what our policy allows us to do, because information is power and knowledge. And then at least the citizen knows that, we are doing a number of things. And so we try to balance that, but because we want good people like yourself to engage with us and to stick with us. I look at it, we're really essentially one big team. We have one team, one mission. We want to get rid of the people in the community that don't belong here and committing crimes that aren't healthy for anybody. So again, it's not a quick fix. There's nothing is. But I like your example because you stuck with us. It was a sustained relationship. It was consistent.
And you stuck
and you
with
kept
us.
you kept calling us, and rather than give up saying no, they don't care.
And the good news is, actually, although my neighbors were very reluctant for a long time, as they started seeing things happening, I wish they would have done this sooner, and yet they did start showing up as part of the solution. They started talking amongst themselves, and we were able to isolate actually who it was before you were, and then able to give you that information. I remember the officers saying, "We want anything you guys know, anything."
And the amount of information over the years, and not enough time for all the examples where citizens have given us information that's been critical to a major case or a minor case. But a lot of the good police work that comes out of Burnsville is a result of cops being proactive, but following up on information citizens give you. It's a good relationship in place.
So one of your roles is to go around and talk. You're less on the beat. Of course, you're not on the beat, but your beat is often meeting in public with different groups. And so I saw you speaking with a group of interfaith leaders, and it was an interesting conversation that came out of this, because it was multi-faith and multi-ethnic interfaith leaders, and we were talking about, I think you brought up the idea of domestic violence. I said, what's happening? And you said a really troubling issue is that domestic violence is, I think you said, going up dramatically or in troubling ways.
Yes.
What was interesting was then we had a discussion as a community about, in this case it was an ethnic group that was interested in you guys being more empathetic to their issues, or to their ways of thinking. And we ended up starting a dialogue on how they could be citizen leaders. Do you remember that?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. That was a interesting conversation. The take home for me on that
With
was
a lot of, and maybe I should just say, this was Somalian citizens. I have dear friends who are Somalians. They would not mind it. I'm not sure why I'm not saying it could have been any group. In this particular case, we have many wonderful Somalian citizens, and this was a Somalian leader. And the question was, how do we understand, how do the police and neighbors understand their different ways of viewing things? And it was a tricky topic.
It was, and I think we identified one thing: domestic violence is extremely serious. The other point to that was the number of domestic-related homicides in the state of Minnesota has increased dramatically. I don't know where we rank off the top of my head across the country, but we're up there. So those are numbers that we're not proud of, and so we have to focus on domestic violence at any level. So it's serious, and we take it serious. And I think the question was, as I recall, and certainly correct me, but there was some concern perhaps that maybe law enforcement should lower the standard, if you will, and be more tolerant of communities or societies where in different cultures or different countries it may be acceptable to hit a female or hit a spouse or to abuse a child. And my response was simply no. The laws apply to everybody. It doesn't matter what your culture is.
I think you said it might be different in a different society,
Yes.
but in this society, these are our
Yep,
laws.
we have laws in place to protect the innocent.
And I think this gentleman was being earnest and
Yes.
appreciated his speaking up, because I think it was an important discussion. And I actually I appreciated your response, and yet I took it a step further. I wondered how, I think he was also, and some youth there, Somalian youth, one of whom really wanted to be a police officer, wanted to know how they could be, that was definitely part of the issue, but then there was this other piece: how can they get more connected into the police force? And you gave some options for that.
Yep.
And then Mike, to take that further, how they might, as a community, be more engaged as citizen leaders.
Yep. Yeah, that was a good conversation. Again, maybe an aha moment for me was to really understand there are certain people that think it might be okay to do that in our culture, because their culture it was. So it's good to have those dialogues. That's why we meet. That's why we have those meetings, so we can explain. No, we're all.
And it wasn't tense.
It was not tense. It was actually very respectful. But it was also, no, that's not accurate. The laws apply to you if you're part of this society. So that was good. Maybe informative and educational for him, and hopefully he shares that with his community members.
Well, and two things came out of it. You invited him and any one of us. You have a police academy that is an opportunity for citizens to come in and learn more about what you do. I think you invited anyone to do ride-alongs anytime, if I remember right. The other piece of it, and this was where my interest was piqued, was this thought of how can these citizens, and I think he was talking about a specific place that he might have lived, or others. How can they work with the police rather than tell the police, not only is it important that they tell you things, but also what can they do, and maybe even beyond your point of just talking about the issue, but what can they do in an organized fashion to be supportive of what works best for our citizens?
Yep, and that was again part of a greater conversation. The biggest thing, and I tried to convey that at times, trust us, reach out to us, just like the other citizens do. And I was impressed.
But you can understand their reluctance.
Absolutely.
I really can.
I was really impressed with a lot of them. Were like, yeah, absolutely. We didn't know we could call you. We didn't know you were that open, or so just breaking down those barriers just by reinforcing the fact that we are accessible. You can reach out to us, and I think I left a couple of them with my business card. I encouraged them to sign up for Citizens Academy. Take advantage of the things that we have in place, because those are opportunities that will benefit all of us. So again, you put some of it back on them. We can offer opportunities, offer engagement, but individual groups or individuals in different areas need to take advantage of that, and we're willing to work with them.
So taking this forward, you and I have also talked about this thought of how do we is there a way to organize that and I know that there's some organized process, and the Citizen Academy is one of those, but is there a way that if a group of citizens and a group of cops got together to say, here's an issue, we're seeing more domestic violence, for example, or maybe we are Muslim believers, or maybe we're immigrants and we didn't trust the officers or the authorities in the country that we immigrated from. how do we get together in some sort of an organized fashion, and the cops share their issues and their problems and how they're trying to interface with this, and the citizens do the same, and working together, not as a complaint session or a you do this, back and forth, but a cooperative session to say, how can we work together?
I think there's a lot of, I think, good things in place already. Couple examples, 360's Communities always offers opportunities for us to engage with them.
Organization.
Yeah, we have a good relationship with them. So sometimes they contact us, and I've contacted them, and officers and other members of our organization have reached out to them when we have a challenge or an issue or concern about a group or somebody maybe we're not serving as best we could. So when we're realizing, hey, we're kind of not in an area where we're comfortable with or have all the resources, we as an organization will reach out to other people who probably have.
Seems to me you could, as you learned from this man, you all could learn from others.
Absolutely. So that's one example I would use. We've talked about this before. Our superintendent, Joe Gothard, the community conversations he's put in place that involves the entire community. I've been able to attend a couple of them, and I've been to 2 of them. Our fire department's been there, other members of the community. So there's stuff.
And what have you learned at those?
It's it's been really good. Well, first of all, I learned that the superintendent is willing to open the doors and really wants to get the community together.
Superintendent of schools, yes.
So the energy to understand the community that he's serving, the energy to try to improve things and gain a perspective on how he can steer the organization by reaching out, I think is phenomenal. It's very time consuming. You have to be engaged and willing to meet with folks. So I think that's been awesome. But he's allowed people in the community to share their challenges. What are challenges you've had as an immigrant coming here? And he opens the floor to them. So just as a chief sitting back, listening, going, okay, what can I learn from this? Are we in a position to help? Or just being aware of their challenges and sensitive to those. So I think that's been phenomenal. I know he's brought in leaders of the community, principals. Janice Porter was brought in. I had the opportunity to listen to her challenges and where she's at today. So he provides an opportunity to inspire others. And most recently, he brought in students, successful students. What have they learned? And a lot of minority students, what are some of your challenges? And they're successful today. So I think it's a group effort. It's the PD willing to go to those opportunities and engage with other organizations and speak with people like yourself. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
And there's back. Where are the Andy Andersons in officers today?
In Burnsville, we're lucky we have a lot of them. We have officers that genuinely like working at the school. As a matter of fact, a few minutes ago you met one, Officer Leslie Perry. She works here.
Work at the high school.
She volunteers to work here. Those are the Andy Andersons. Those are the ones that make a difference, and we'll hear about things she's done. Mark Hetherington is another officer who works up here. We have, and they're.
But why does she want to work here? Why does Mark want to do what? I mean, why?
They have a special niche. They really do, and I love kids and I have kids. But to work in this environment, it takes a special person. Somebody generally cares about them, understands them in a different way. And so it's certain people are drawn to certain things in law enforcement. Some like to do evidence work, some like to be investigators, some like to do traffic enforcement. And then there's the special group. They're all special, but they have a calling closer to the kids to make a difference, because I think they realize the value of their position and how they can positively influence kids and make a difference in their lives long term.
I know of one officer I've heard about that, and I hope this isn't breaking a confidence or getting him in trouble, but you don't know who it is, so there, who actually gives out his personal cell phone number to take calls after hours and with, I think, more domestic violence situations. That's remarkable. That's an Andy Anderson. It's even beyond, although it's wonderful that there's people that opt into in their beat to work with students or different environments. But this is an officer that's saying, he's a citizen professional, really, in that sense. He's saying, I want to still offer what I can even when I go home at night, which I realize that there's boundaries issues and sometimes strains and stress, and yet I think Andy Anderson, and those were different times. Officers are arguably probably a little bit busier. Our whole world is busier. And yet Andy Anderson, I presume, got something more out of doing that. Not only was it pragmatic for his work, but he didn't have to teach gymnastics to do his job good, right? And this officer didn't have to give, or doesn't have to, I don't know, his personal phone phone number. Are there other officers, and you may not know that, I realize that sometimes this is done without, you know, we don't talk, often these people don't talk about it.
I think, you know, what you're talking about is those quiet leaders. I think good leaders are, you know, they have humility. They're not going to come and say, hey,
Right,
boss,
right.
guess what I'm doing off duty? They just do it. And then when you find out about it, typically you're not shocked because you see their character on the street. So we have a lot of special cops that will do things like that above and beyond. Again, that's information I probably wouldn't know, or I may find out at some point, and I'd say, that's awesome. But I'd also say, you know, balance.
Right,
It's
right,
tough.
right.
You can't run.
There's a group you know about and I know about, and they're actually an organized group. And in our work, we're interested in not only those quiet leaders. We love the quiet leaders, and all of us. What's more humbling and powerful than a quiet leader? And yet, one of our concerns in civic engagement is if we don't elevate those quiet leaders, and if we don't get those quiet leaders to talk a little bit more about what we do, we're losing an opportunity for more such leaders to see, hey, I could do that, or I might get involved in a solution. So one solution that I'm well aware of is the police chaplains group, and this is an organized group, and they're volunteers, and they are citizen professionals off time. This is their volunteer time, and explain what they do.
Well, thanks for bringing them up. They're amazing. They truly are. And they've volunteered hundreds of hours and years of their service. And I always think of the chaplains as kind of like the SWAT team. They don't get called out that often, but when they do, you really need them, and it's a critical situation, usually involving a death or a critical incident, and they're phenomenal. They don't get paid. You buy them a cup of coffee and they're happy, but they take turns, the group of them. They carry a phone or a pager, so they're accessible 7/24.
And what do they do when they're called out?
They'll come out, they've assisted with death notifications, or if we're at a death scene and the family needs support, they'll come out for that. They're flexible. They'll do it.
But they are not in officer mode. They are in support mode. I've seen one of them in action by accident.
Correct.
He was involved. He was called out for a young man was involved in a fatal accident. It was the young man's mistake, and the man was very shook up, young guy. And this police chaplain picked him up at the accident site, took him away from the accident site so he could at least get that break. Apparently, he was not arrested or anything. But then took him to a coffee shop, sat down with him, and waited until he could get a ride. I think there was some concern that he would be, there would be charges pressed. But was that presence, and this would be a quote-unquote bad guy, and he was very calm with this guy and very, you know, sort of that presence. Not preaching, not telling him he did something wrong, just there.
And I think I know which call you're talking about, and that's a great example of where clearly this human being made a terrible mistake, and there's no doubt they wish that had never happened. But in the same breath, we need someone to support them and stay with them and be available to them. And that's a great example of they came out, we just called and they came and said, can you help this person while we sort through all the details and look at the potential charges later. And clearly this person was not a flight risk and wasn't a risk to harm anybody. So, you know, if that would have been the case, it would have been handled differently and the chaplains wouldn't have been involved. But yeah, so it's a tragic event, and so they get called in, and they've seen some horrific things. I mean, they've been called in, death scenes, murder, suicides. We've had
and they
those.
don't just, I mean, not just, I mean, they do this incredibly important work, and you would not know what was going on except for I happened and I know that it was a police chaplain and just was alert to the dynamic. Now nobody else in that coffee shop would have had a clue what was going on other than maybe an upset kid. But this group meets regularly as well. So this is an organized group. This isn't just a bunch, you know, I'm on a list, call me.
No, they're very organized. They're part of our volunteer network if we would need them for anything, just beyond death notifications and things like that. A good example, unfortunately we've had some fires in Burnsville the past few years, and that displaces families, so we'll call them in to help work with the families, help us work with the families and make sure they have the resources they need. And so they're an advocate really for the entire community. Non-denominational, doesn't matter who you are, they'll come and help. So if we would need them in a bigger disaster, they would be available for that. So they play a larger role in the community.
And again, I'll go back to the question, why? What's in it for them? There's no pay for it. And they're nice men, but I don't think they're just doing it, and they're great men. Right, I've met these men, and they are that quiet leader, and you feel almost a holy presence, or I do when I'm with them. And yet, what are those other reasons? What's the pragmatism of doing something like that? Why waste your time? They've got wives, they've got families with their own issues.
They're good human beings.
But what else is in it for them?
I think they understand the service above self. I think a lot of them, I know, it gives them an opportunity to be closer to cops, and gives them an opportunity
I've heard
maybe
one of them
to,
say that.
yep, closer to cops, and maybe help cops or recognize, hey, you look like you could use some help. So they're intuitive. They're in touch with the organization, members of the organization. They do care about the people that are out there every day, and they build relationships with them. And I think they're phenomenal, and they'll ride with the officers. And so, but it takes a long time to build the trust of a police officer. So it's not a hit and run type of game with them. They're in it for the long haul, and that's why you see them get together consistently and develop relationships with the community.
And I noticed that they're also developing relationships with the community, but with each other in a co-supportive way.
Yes.
Because I've been just blessed to be in one of the couple of those meetings,
Yes.
and they're sort of processing often in guy ways. One of them's a former professional football player.
They have a sick
You're all
sense of
cops.
humor.
They're very sick sense of humor, but they're really great guys, and they have very different political beliefs. It's fascinating and fun to watch that going
Sometimes
on.
I've thought I would need to call back up in a few of the meetings, but they're good sports about it. And they reach out to other police departments as well, and they try to grow that.
And they're replicating their model, which is what you're getting at, another really important principle in civic engagement. It's wonderful to have these quiet leaders. It's wonderful to have these isolated groups, and yet when they can replicate that, they're making our whole society better. So this group, I believe, started in an adjacent community, came to Burnsville, is very solid in Burnsville, and is also trying to replicate to other, maybe already has it replicated. That's community engagement or citizen professional, really on steroids, so to speak.
It is, and I've been with Burnsville. It's been 25 years. They've been here since I think I've started. There's always been one around, and it's really grown to a pretty neat group.
So these are the good guys, and then you mentioned much earlier the idea that some people don't trust cops. How, and I know you deal with that in numerous ways, but how have you encouraged your officers, or how did you learn how to be a trustworthy cop?
Well, you demonstrate it. You show them they can trust you, and once you lose trust, it's difficult, if not impossible, sometimes to get it back. And so I think just demonstrating it, walking the talk and being out there.
You mentioned that a local retailer came to you guys on Peace Officers Memorial Day. So share that story.
I'm glad you asked that. It was actually just a week ago today, I believe. Our local Target store, great partners with us. They came into the police department, and what they wanted to do was recognize and thank the officers personally that they have dealt with on a regular basis who make a difference. And they weren't asked to do it. They came in, they actually had certificates for each of the individual officers. I believe there was 9 or 10 of them, and a few of them were actually on duty, so it was kind of neat. But they were very grateful, and what they focused on, they said, I don't want to brag, but they said, hey, this is one of the best PDs we've ever worked with, and it's because you cops are always out there. Well, it's the frontline officers doing a great job.
Well, and the point of this is they know who these. They didn't call. I don't presume that they called you up and say, "Now, who's the guys?"
No,
they
had their names on the forms. It's because they had been dealing with them, and they're very good at Target. The loss prevention folks are very professional, and that solid relationship in place has been great.
Developed relationships with some of their staff.
And we've talked about this before we started. The level of your success, either individually or organizationally, is always based on the quality of your relationships. And so, whether it's you and I talking or other members, if we can continue to build those trust and positive relationships, if you're approachable and you make yourself available and you're patient with one another, I think those relationships continue to flourish, and then we're all successful.
Right, and that is critical in our work, in your work, and I think often in professions that's forgotten. So it's so critical, and more so as we become a more fragmented society. These relationships, without sustained relationships, it's really hard to do good things together in a community. So we've just got a few more minutes, and I want to understand, or at least give you an opportunity to kind of look into the future and talk about what you see coming down the pike, or what you hope coming down the pike, personally, professionally, community-wise.
Well, personally, my goal is to be the best leader I can be. And again, it's not easy. You certainly want to leave the organization in better condition than it was. I want to maintain a high level of discipline and accountability for the organization, far be it from us being perfect, but we certainly strive to be the best we can be. I heard it described this way: the police job is a perfect job for the imperfect person. And so we have to realize our humanity, but still be accountable to a higher level.
Right.
So that's one of the goals. Burnsville's a great community. It's an active community. There's a lot of opportunities to do a number of things here. We're so accessible. So we have a lot of volume of people each day.
Geographically, yes.
So one of the challenges now and in the future for the PD is just maintaining a high level of response to the high level number of calls, or the intensity of some of the calls we have. So maintaining good staffing, making sure we have the tools that we need. Another challenge, not just for the Burnsville PD, but this is across the state and country, is keeping up with technology. And as crimes change. And
you've done that already to a certain extent.
I think we have, but so have the criminals. So the tools that they use and the methods they use to commit certain crimes, computer-related. Well, if you're using a computer or a phone to commit certain crimes, it's a little bit harder to get at.
Right.
You're not looking at just a written note or a written document. You're looking at data stored on a computer, and then to have the ability to extract that information and look at it and analyze it is time consuming. So technology is good, but it also benefits the criminal element as well.
Right.
It takes us a much longer time to track certain things down.
Interesting.
The community, I think we're in good shape. It's a diverse community, a lot of good people. More good people live here than bad. We deal with just a small percentage of the folks that get out of line, and I can't emphasize that enough. And I really try to focus on, in my position, we work for the silent majority. Majority of the people appreciate what we do, want us out there, and that's really who you focus on. Again, it's that small percentage of folks that can create a lot of havoc for the community. And I've said this before, and I've said it publicly: Burnsville Police Department, the city of Burnsville, our community as a whole, we're not defined by merely one or two individuals and reckless acts. We're defined by the good things that we do. And so the good guys don't run. The good members of the community, the members of our department don't run. We hold the line, and we'll continue to do that. So I'm excited for the future. We continue to hire good people and promote good people and train good people. So as we move forward, just to continue to be disciplined, to be the best we can be. And it's not easy. I look at it like a fitness program. You have to do it every day, right? You have to discipline to stay in shape and do the right thing. Yep, it takes discipline. So we want to keep moving forward with the discipline.
Keep doing my YMCA with the kids.
Continue to do it.
I think a couple of you cops need to come play basketball with us at the YMCA. We're fun. We'll take a couple of you guys, even if you are fit.
There's a couple that are pretty good. We'll send them your way.
I'm sure they are. Well, it was great talking to you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Good stories, and keep us posted on what our community can do to help you and how we can all work together.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Gieseke, Burnsville Police.